Since analysis of large-scale work forces me to only present a selection of passages from a full score, I wanted to change things up by doing a complete investigation of an entire movement that also happens to be one of my favorite. Today we are doing a complete material analysis of the first movement of Arnold Schoenberg's second string quartet. First, I'm going to introduce the two main ideas of this movement, which we will call A and B, from which the vast majority of subsequent developments derive. After this familiarization, we are systematically going to work our way through the movement bar by bar, page by page, discussing transformations of these core motifs and introducing new ones as we encounter them along the way. We are going to spend some considerable time here in the beginning of the video understanding the primary ideas A and B, since they make up almost all of the music, and I therefore find it deeply favorable to have as good of an understanding of them as possible. Part of the reason is that the form of this movement is somewhat cyclical. The same surface structures reappear constantly, like looking at the same object through different lenses. At times the work seems more like a compositional etude than a sonata structure that you traditionally would find as the first movement of a string quartet. For example, we get 5 statements of the A music and 6 of the B music in this quite short first movement, and that is excluding their more secondary motivic appearances in what one could call development sections. But I digress. The A music, which is the main theme of the work, consists of 2 ideas. One is motivic expansion and is made up of 2 different side statements of the same material. And the second idea is an answer to this phrase, which outlines harmonic material that will permeate the work. Let's start with idea number 1. The 2 cells of this motif will be labeled A1 and A2. The reason for this separation is that they are treated and developed independently over the course of the work, even if they are heard as part of the same phrase when appearing together like this. The placement of these seemingly simple rhythms have a particular syncopated quality in relationship to the 3/4 pulse of the work. This is mainly because the motif treat beat 3 as a strong point of arrival and beats 1 and 2 as if they were weak upbeats. This makes it feel as though the motif is constantly bumping into itself. It's especially noticeable when idea number 2 arrives and resets the rhythmic logic to a more traditional 3/4 distribution. First then can you really notice the oddity of the previous phrase. The second idea will be labeled A3 and serves mostly as an answering phrase in the exposition, has quite few appearances and is not subject to motivic transformation. What it does do is outline the harmonic contents of the work, introducing both augmented and octatonic sonorities. Let's hear the first 4 bars of this piece to familiarize ourselves with this A material. Think especially about the tumbling nature of the first phrase. While that marinates, let's introduce the second primary music of this movement, which is of course called B. This is a chromatic song-like melody made up of a sequence of expanding sighing motifs separated by quarter note pauses. There are 3 of them, aptly named in order of appearance, B1, B2, B3, and a tail motif, not unlike the second phrase of the A motif. They are all independently varied and treated throughout the work, which is why we name them differently. I know this line of music can seem daunting to the uninitiated, but right now I just want us to focus on a small number of facts, which will help us through the music. First, its expanding nature. Each phrase subsequently gets longer. Non-chromatic intervals are introduced, effectively transposing the chromatic sighing steps. And the total length of all motifs is 13 bars, which is an uneven number of bars, but also a very special number for this particular composer, who feared the number 13 like the plague, which might be why we will see certain treatments of the line trying to blur out this fact. As you can see, B2 is given a different color than the rest of the statements. That is because of Schönberg's proclivity to use this particular cell for subsequent variations, and therefore we want to visually separate it from the rest, even though it often appears as a part of this longer song-like music. I think that nothing will introduce us better to this motif than listening to it, so let's return to the score and I will explain the first 2 pages of music, then we'll listen. The first 4 bars we have already heard. They state the full A material in the key of F sharp minor, which is the key of the piece. There is lovely imitation going on in the accompaniment between the second violin and the viola, which I have highlighted in gray. This color will serve as a tool throughout the analysis to show points of interest in the score, which doesn't treat vital material in need of labeling, yet creates continuity through symmetry and repetition, and will therefore often be animated together with the main line when we listen. After these 4 opening bars, we get a through composed pause of sorts, pivoting the music through the use of minor 6 to the key of A minor. Since it's a recurring transition in this movement, I have given them the color pink, so we can notice their recurrence, but not supply them with a letter, since it's not a motif subject to development. After a false restart through an augmented A1 motif in the cellos, the full opening statement repeats in A minor, now doubled by the second violin, and with the last A3 motif being replaced by a repetition of A2, leading to yet another pivot towards the next section. This music is almost entirely chromatic. The second violin plays restless chromatic eighth notes, and the cellos continually restates the opening sighing B motif in an imitative fashion. We get the full statement of B in the viola, precisely as laid out in our opening examination, and then a total repetition of this music transposed by an octave in the first violin, with the only difference being that the tail of B is replaced with a fragment of B2. The biggest point of interest during this exposition of B is how Schönberg deals with the point of repetition. As I mentioned earlier, the full statement of B occupies 13 bars, something Schönberg wants to blur out. This is done excellently by first forcing the viola to its upper register, mimicking the timbre of the violin, then also offsetting the repetition so that it interrupts the tail of B, thereby restarting the motif a bar early. This alteration is really felt in the music, as you almost can't hear the point of repetition. The material seems to seamlessly continue, and it's only upon closer inspection you can tell that it in fact simply repeats. So keep an ear out for that. After this, to take us home, Schönberg restates the opening A music, but this time ending with both the repetition of A2 and the A3 motif to finish the passage. Let's listen. After this music, we get an instant restatement of the B motif in the first violin, but with B3 replaced with the tail motif, effectively shortening the B melody by removing its longest subphrase. This whole statement is then repeated in the cellos, leading us to the next section of music, where we find the first transformation of this movement. This is a transformation of the A2 motif, and it's achieved through adding 2 eighth notes, which lengthens the motif, and giving it the augmented quality we found in A3 by extending the intervallic relationship of the descending notes from seconds to thirds. It's clearly and audibly derived from A2, but changed enough to warrant its own color, as it's also a subject of further alteration. This is exemplified only a mere 5 bars after its introduction, where it appears inverted in the viola, only for that inverted variation to then be fragmented, leading the music to a dynamic climax. After this climax, we get the introduction of the only other unique motif in the whole movement, C. I won't cover it more deeply, since its only reappearance through the movement is one fragment of its chromatic eighth note tail. After a restatement of C, augmented and varied versions of A1 and A2 sets up for a calmer, more delicate texture to be covered after our next listen. Enjoy. The next texture starts with a very symmetrical disposition. As you can see, we get a statement of A in the first violins, but due to it being played sul ponticello with the bow very close to the bridge, it's given a ghostly overtone timbre, acting more as an ethereal accompaniment, while the second violin plays the main line. We also have a symmetrical diminished accompaniment in the lower strings, and this whole structure is then mirrored at the point of repetition. After this repetition, cascading A2 transformations pull the music forward, and like their last appearance, this music quickly gets fragmented, leading us to a captivating moment of this movement. Here we get a statement of the B music with the repetition of B2, all appearing as an inverted canon between the cellos and the first violin, with variations of the B1 motif in the accompaniment. Following this, the transformed A2 motif combined with the only reappearance of the C fragment, again as a canon, and the passage. The next page starts with a brittle and longing restatement of our inverted B canon, now between the viola and the first violin. B2 is then fragmented and further varied by dramatic minor ninth displacements, a variation that starts dominating the musical surface by spreading through imitation, never to appear again. After this, overlapping A2 transformations suspensefully lead the music back down, preparing the next section, which might be my favorite of the entire work. Here we get the A music in the viola superimposed over its augmented version in the cello at the interval of a fifth. Look how all the note values are doubled in the cello, maintaining the exact same intervallic relationship, thereby extending its duration long enough for the violas to go on a climbing diminished journey by way of repeating the A2 motif. After a set of repeated A2 transformations, the pivoting minor sixths make a return, calling for a cadence that gets interrupted 2 times before finally arriving in F sharp minor. Let's listen. To minimize interruption, I will now cover the rest of the movement in one go. First, we get an exact repetition of the first appearance of the B music from the beginning of the movement, acting as a start of our recapitulation. However, all voices have been redistributed, with the melody now appearing in the cellos instead of the smaller strings, who instead acts as imitative accompaniment. We also get the exact same interrupted repetition we found at the beginning of the movement to avoid the 13-bar structure, but this time the music refuses to give way. Instead, it becomes a canon like in the development. This time starting from the B3 motif between the cellos and the violin. Here Schoenberg plays with the variation technique of diminution, progressively quickening the B3 motif by reducing its relative note value, upping the pace of the music before the closing section. Just look here, in this small picture of only 10 bars, we find 3 different transformations of the same motif. The B3 motif at 3 different speeds, quickly infecting the music with more vigor and restlessness, while maintaining its intervallic contour. This quickened B3 motif is now accompanied by a total overlap of 3 independent lines of the A material in the rest of the quartet, all offset by a quarter note, creating a diminished avalanche of our opening motif. All of this simultaneity culminates in absolute beauty as the B2 motif insistently gets repeated over open, wide, and austere quartal harmonies that appear consonant as ever in relationship to the preceding dissonance. As a last goodbye, we get the B material over an F-sharp tonic pedal, again getting stuck on the B2 motif, repeating it relentlessly. And so we have arrived at the last page. The minor 6th pivot that opened the first section now closes the last one before tired B2 motifs and transformed A2 motifs slowly tumble down to end the movement. Let's hear this ending, and congratulations for sitting through a quite demanding material analysis. Without further ado, thank you for listening, truly.